2019, the year of the future. Our bodies have merged with our devices.
Emergency!
Our society is beholden to unchecked corporate greed, and our sprawling cities are starkly divided between the haves and the have-nots. Science fiction is dominated by crisis modes and fantasies of perpetual disaster, set not in the far-flung future, but today.
Don't look at the flash. Stretch out.
Phantom Plane. Examining the legacy of cyberpunk in the year of the future.
Cyberpunk has considered so many different issues on different scales, how we think of ourselves as individuals, how society shifts with major technological progress. It tends to look at the world in the near future as opposed to the far future.
Cyberpunk has always looked at technology as something advancing people's life and also threatening.
I think that was why Cyberpunk was so attractive, because it was a very credible sequence. A lot of sci-fi normally has to do with mystery or with outer planetary travel, while Cyberpunk as a genre was completely logical, right? Sure, it happens, sure cities will be overcrowded and people will be poor and corporations will take over the world.
Tumors in the brain.
都市は戦場的で退屈だ。情報が水のように道や路地にあふれる。つい最近までこれはサイエンスフィクションだったが。
The cyberpunk world came out mid-80s, I think. That period was start to mixing up really quickly, East and West. In the Blade Runner, I remember the guy asked the noodle on the street.
3, 4.
The old man said, "That's the 十分ですよ."
No, 4, 2, 2, 4.
Two is enough. Two is enough. Listening to the Japanese in West sounds really future.
When we saw Blade Runner, Akira, no Ghost in a Shell, for us that was Asia. These films really defined how a lot of Western people saw the East. And then in the same time, Neuromancer, I think, came out in 1984.
I think after the world wars in the West, there developed this idea of progress, and they were creating a whole new world now. And so fused with the advance of technologies, there's a sense that technology was part of this progress that was beginning to unfold, and that was defined in a way that we were creating a better world. And so it started becoming perhaps somewhat utopian.
Back then at the 60s, there are a lot of promises, like we will have better future in 2000, we will have better technology, the utopian dream.
I think it was also the 1950s, the post-war generation was over-optimistic about the future, because it was the atomic age, right? There was the idea of nuclear power can solve anything and we will have unlimited energy without any waste. Maybe the 80s also were the realization that that's not possible, that things like nuclear power are dangerous.
I think that was the foundation, in a way, from which the sense of cyberpunk developed.
It was a direct response from the West to the emergence of corporate Japan, particularly in the 1980s. Cyberpunk was, in a way, an articulation, but also a sensual kind of aesthetic response, because it's seductive, always that iconic geisha image in Blade Runner, but it's also threatening at the same time. And all these desires and fears all kind of commingled into this aesthetic.
For me, there's always this sort of slightly biological feel about it, like techno-fetishistic It's almost like a corpse that's been dissected and opened up. And then that becomes the basis for constructing this world.
The idea of cyberpunk changed from the 70s, 80s to now, from the very early idea of body and machine merging together, and then later through the 90s with internet, and it changed to more around the idea of virtual reality and online hacking. I think now it's going through another different phase. With this exhibition, that it's so much also about how the idea of future arrived to a very singular end. Always science fiction nowadays is always dystopia. It's always disaster.
日本人っていうか他の国の人もそうだと思うけど、誰も未来が本当にそういう風になるとは思ってないし、未来に対しては希望をちゃんと持ってたはずだけど、今はもう未来に対して希望を持つことはあんまりできなくて、昔作ったこのサイバーパンクだとか世紀末の作品がもう現実のものになっていってるっていう。
I think we're at a very precarious moment now in terms of evaluating whether the technology now is really for the good or for the bad. Cyberpunk today has a very different tone to it, partly maybe because we're in the future that cyberpunk was projecting. It's no longer science fiction, we're living it now. So I think this show is coming at a very interesting moment.
One of the strands of discussion that came up was the question of what space there is left for science fiction now to take up, and whether science fiction doesn't have that much room to speculate anymore.
This year is the year that Blade Runner was set, and what do we still have of the legacy of cyberpunk? Is it still kind of relevant? I sort of had this theory that in some ways science fiction has sort of ceased to exist, and what it's been replaced with is a kind of mutated version of a kind of detective noir or a kind of horror. Maybe there's something about all that doom and gloom that can actually create something kind of constructive in the situation that we're in.
Being happy in life may not be what the real issue is about. It's not what we really wanted to focus on here. So maybe more, how are we going to live in this, whatever it is? Let's not call it dystopian or utopian, but how are we going to live in it?